Okay, so I'm going to welcome everybody this morning. Before we introduce our guest speaker, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Lori Pepinella. I'm CEO of the Southern Ocean County Chamber, and this is our May membership meeting done virtually with, of course, a fantastic keynote, John D. Fanberg.
Oh, hang on.
We're going to ask everybody to mute. So this way, when our speaker is going over all his presentation, we definitely get all the insight that we need. And we're also going to ask anyone who has a question to put it in chat. You can either direct it to myself or to Kate, and we will make sure that if it isn't already covered in the presentation, that we will have a Q&A session afterwards to address any additional questions that everyone has. There's a lot to go over. So again, I'm going to introduce John Fanberg, Esquire. He's the managing member and co-chair cannabis industry practice from Brack Eitler. And he has more than 30 years of experience in health and hospital law with an emphasis on corporate, transactional, and regulatory matters for physicians and healthcare institutions, and a recognized leader in this sector. And he is known certainly throughout the state as a leader in his field. So we can't be more appreciative to have you join us this morning, John.
Great. Lori, thanks so much for having me and everybody for participating this morning. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this new upcoming industry. And so as part of the introduction, Lori mentioned my healthcare experience because I also chair the law firm's healthcare practice. And Brock Eichler, just briefly, because my marketing people would insist I say this, we have approximately 85 lawyers in 4 core practice areas: real estate, litigation, corporate tax, and healthcare and hospital law. And our main office is in Roseland in Essex County, exit 145. And but I've lived in New Jersey my entire life and spent many weekend and summer, et cetera, down the Jersey Shore in your area. So based upon the introduction, healthcare and hospital law, why and how am I talking about the cannabis industry? And that's because a number of years ago, especially when Governor Murphy announced his candidacy to run for governor, and watching the New Jersey legislature limp through some effort to change the law, and watching how the medical marijuana and cannabis industry has evolved, this industry is a highly regulated one. And I've been very involved in a highly regulated industry my entire career in the healthcare sector. And I thought that because of that, this would be something right up my alley. And I also represent a number of healthcare providers who endorse and support medical marijuana. And also I represent the pathology side in New Jersey. And I thought, hey, this is a way for them to get into this because there'll be a testing component of all this. And since we also have real estate and tax and all the other specialty areas that are going to be required by people entering into this business, we should do this and get involved at the ground floor. I went to my first conference in New Jersey at the Prudential, not the Prudential Center, NJPAC. And it was supposed to be, they have 2 main rooms there, the big main theater where they have concerts and performances, and a smaller theater, I think Victoria Theater. There was so much interest, they had to move it to the theater. And I remember I saw lawyers milling around also, but none of them had on their name tag had the name of the law firm. They were embarrassed and felt awkward at identifying themselves coming to a cannabis industry event as a representative of their law firm. My partner and I, who co-chairs, we did not have that hesitation, and we saw that there was a huge upside and opportunity. So we've been watching the industry evolve in the entire country over the last 6 and 7 years. It's clearly big on the West Coast, California, Oregon, Washington. When Massachusetts adopted legislation to enable an adult recreational use, that was the first major New Jersey East Coast state. Vermont had it, but Vermont's kind of a granola crunchy state anyway, so it's not surprising they moved in that direction. But Massachusetts was a little different. So in watching what was happening in New Jersey, there was a delegation of the legislature that went out to Colorado to see how their law was being executed, impacted, and what was that industry all about. And they came back here and they were very enthused, saying, we can have a regulated market here that is, it's not, head shops with beaded curtains and lava lamps, et cetera. This is a legitimate business that employs people, can pay taxes, and can pay rent in difficult and challenged downtowns where we've seen retail go out the window because of the internet and especially online purchasing. So they began this initiative, but could not get the votes in the New Jersey Senate. Governor Murphy runs. This is one of his key platforms. He wins the election, but can't get the legislature to move forward with this legislation. So it stops probably in any real energy sometime in 2019. The decision is we're going to put this on the ballot and let the citizens vote as part of the November election as a constitutional amendment. We began to write a lot of articles. We did a lot of research, but the other thing we did was we actually did some polling. And we did some real serious polling, and we did it in July, August, September, and October to see and try to anticipate how this vote would come out. And what was surprising was that exactly what our polling numbers stated is how the election, how the vote for the constitutional amendment came out. It was over 60% in favor. And the other part of when we were doing the polling, we also kind of sliced and diced it between Republican and Democrats in terms of how they would vote. Clearly and obviously, but maybe not obviously, the Democrats were probably 70, 80% in favor. But what was, I think, an interesting tipping point, the Republican side was 55%. And so we were pretty confident this would go through with flying colors. The downside to all of this is that this whole process has been delayed. We felt had the law been passed several years ago, we would have outpaced our neighboring states in terms of getting to market first, primarily New York and Pennsylvania. New Jersey has a unique map. Up north, it's New York oriented. Down south to the west, it's Philadelphia oriented with huge populations. And New Jersey is still the most densely populated state in the country. And so we would have had people coming across the rivers and bridges, buying cannabis and bringing it back to their home state, which would be illegal, and it will be illegal, but we know people will do that, and we missed the jump on all of this. Give you an example, there's a bordering town in Colorado next to Idaho. And in that town, there is a adult recreational dispensary. Their sales are 400% of the average cannabis sales throughout the rest of Colorado. So the neighboring states who are not into this yet, they're seeing their people come in. But for the New Jersey's constitutional amendment, New York would not have moved this as quickly as it did. I've never seen legislation in New York move so fast. It was basically less than a month. And their law is far more wide-ranging than New Jersey's. And to the extent if there's questions about that, I can get into that later. In addition, we're now seeing Pennsylvania actively moving in this direction and trying to get it on their ballot. Since New Jersey, we've seen some other states, Mississippi, Virginia. Now we're moving in traditionally conservative southern states are moving in this direction. So we're just a shade under 20 states in the country that have adopted adult recreational policies. So it's really moving and it's moving fast. We've seen much more movement in Washington. The banking industry wants to get into this. They can't because they're federally regulated. And we have a lot of other businesses that can't do this because of the federal laws. I think that's going to change within the next 12, 18 months as more and more states adopt these regs and ancillary businesses want to get into it. So let's talk about New Jersey. So New Jersey adopts the constitutional amendment in November. We then in New Jersey still need a law to lay all of this out as to what's going to happen. And it took a long time to get there. And it wasn't until February that finally the legislature and the governor signed legislation implementing what the New Jersey voters approved back in November. The law's already been amended twice. And that is very common because, and it will continue to evolve because once the industry actually opens up, we will see what works here and what doesn't work here. And then there'll be changes. The key part of this legislation, which was about 200 pages, and I've read it 3 times just because I need to constantly refresh my recollection. But interestingly, over 50% of the law has nothing to do with selling and buying cannabis in New Jersey. It's about conflicts of interest. And it's similar to the legislation when we introduced casino gambling in New Jersey. And that is to try to not only eliminate the criminal element, but we don't want people who are legislators or bureaucrats in the agencies that are going to be created set up all of these laws and rules and then go into the cannabis business. There has to be some appropriate separation. So while only 100 pages really deal with what's going to happen in New Jersey. But in fact, the law doesn't really speak to that with a couple of exceptions, and I'll mention that. The key part of the legislation is establishing the Cannabis Regulatory Commission. And that entity, which has met 3 times as recently, their 3rd time was yesterday, that's the body that's going to establish the regulatory framework upon which cannabis will be sold and purchased in the state of New Jersey. Next slide, please. So this is the commission. On August 24th, the governor appointed these people to work on the commission. And of course, being New Jersey, there was controversy. You'll see Charles Barker, former staffer for Senator Cory Booker. He wasn't an original appointee to the commission. There was a lot of pushback that there wasn't enough diversity on the commission, so Mr. Barker was appointed. They are going to establish the regulatory framework upon which licenses will be issued, what they will cost, how many licenses will be, almost everything. So my phone's been ringing off the hook since November, more so since February when the law was signed. People want to get into this business. I said, but I don't know. No one knows what this business is going to be yet until this commission establishes the regulatory framework. We're going to know what that's going to look like probably within the next 8 to 12 weeks, because the proposed regulations will come out, there'll be comment, and then regulations will have to be ultimately adopted. That will take some time. Next slide, please. So people are all asking me 2 things. When can I go into a store and buy cannabis? And when will but more importantly, when will the first store open? What I'm telling people, and I think this is fairly safe, it'll probably be the end of this year or the beginning of next year. That's the window, with a couple of exceptions. In talking to the governor's office during this entire process, they would like the medical dispensaries to get a special license to begin to sell to adults. But the caveat there is that in order to get that special license, the medical dispensary would have to demonstrate they have enough product to support their patient base. And if they do, then they may get these special licenses. So even though I said that the first store won't open until the end of 2021 or beginning of 2022, that may change. But right now, the dispensaries that have the medical licenses are having a hard time meeting their needs because there have been so many more patients who have gotten prescriptions. When the governor, our prior governor, Governor Christie for 8 years, He was not a proponent of medical cannabis. So at the end of his term, there were only 17,000 people in New Jersey that had access to medical dispensaries. As of last count of the last maybe week or two, there are over 100,000. Based upon our population, the experts seem to think there should be at least 200,000 people with a medical card. Whether that we get to that number or not, I don't know. But again, there could be this special license. So the first meeting was April 12th. The second meeting was April 22nd. The third meeting was yesterday. There's a lot of talking, not a lot of substance. They're trying to be transparent, but when there's rulemaking, it usually isn't all that transparent. We'll know when we know. Next slide, please. This is an important chart because what we put together the differences between the adult rec law and the medical marijuana law to try to people kind of always asking what's the difference, and I'll get into a couple of key aspects. Clearly, the in terms of consumer consideration and patient registration as an adult, you have to be 21 years or of age or older. In medical marijuana, there is no age limitation currently. In terms of how much will you be able to purchase, an adult store, you can purchase up to 1 ounce. In medical, you can get up to 3 ounces per month. Now, we know from seeing in other states, you have people will go from, who want more than 1 ounce, they go from store to store. And they try to get around that limitation. And states are trying to come up with ways to eliminate the ability to go beyond the dosage that you're allowed to purchase. I'm not sure how successful they've been, but that's something they're paying attention to. Taxes. So this is a key aspect of the law. So there, and what we've learned from other states, and we've heard other state governors who are against it, and they say, well, they'll go along with it, well, but to quote them, we're going to tax the hell out of it. They miss the boat as to what this is all about. Why do we have an adult recreational law in other states? Well, here in New Jersey, the primary motive was to correct law enforcement wrongs, social justice. The statistics in New Jersey and other states are off the charts that if you are a minority, black, brown, or otherwise, depending upon what town you live in, or more importantly, what town you are caught with cannabis, the penalties were much more severe, and the likelihood of being arrested and having a criminal record was off the charts. So the enforcement was unfair and targeted minorities. The second key aspect of why we went down this path, okay, thank you. The other key reason was prohibition of cannabis doesn't work. It's been illegal for 70 years. Anybody can go to any junior high school or high school, not that I'm endorsing underage cannabis use, but it's there, it's been there, and it's not going away. It's time to realize that prohibition, when it comes to cannabis, doesn't work. And the third component is the industry is being controlled by the black market, criminal element. Now, we're never going to eliminate 100% of the criminal activity and the gangs that are selling this and profiting of all this, and who knows what they use the money to do elsewhere. But it's time to eliminate or try to minimize that impact. So if you charge too much or you put too much sales tax on it, the consumer is going to buy it where it's cheaper. So this has to be less expensive or economically competitive with the black market, or you're not going to eliminate the black market. So the sales tax is the sales tax for everything else in New Jersey except for clothing. And to encourage local towns and communities to allow a dispensary into their community, they're going to allow another 2% tax, which will stay in that community. As a result, there's been now change on the medical cannabis because we don't want the medical dispensaries to go out of business because they serve a function. And you'll see that there'll be a phase out on those taxes on or about July 1st of 2022. Next slide, please. Now we get into employer rights and responsibilities. This is a complicated issue. Unlike alcohol or perhaps other drugs, cannabis stays in the system for 30 days and you may not be impaired. We've had situations and we've been called by clients and users too. Hey, I'm going to Colorado skiing. I'm going to buy and use cannabis legally there. I'm going to come back to New Jersey. I'm not going to use it. What happens if there's a random drug test at my employer 3 weeks from now and I haven't touched this stuff? So there's a whole new body of law when it comes to labor and employment issues. Some of this is going to continue to be fleshed out from the Cannabis Regulatory Commission, and laws will evolve. But based upon what the new law says is you can't refuse to hire or employ a person or take any adverse action against an employee just because that person or employee does or does not use cannabis. And the presence of the cannabis and the chemicals in the body doesn't necessarily give the employer the right to terminate that person from employment. It's, impairment is a very subjective test right now, whereas other, like alcohol, you can do a blood test and you know what the blood level alcohol content is. The one key exception is in this third bullet is if in fact having or hiring employees would violate the terms of the federal contract or lose federal funding. You run into a situation too if people live in federal housing and you can't, use cannabis in those locations, which is why another element of the law, not only does the law allow you to use it in your private home, but the law is going to establish through the Cannabis Regulatory Commission what we're calling cannabis lounges. It's a place to go to smoke and hang out cannabis. The lounges are coming online in other states because if you can't smoke in your home, and if you can't, and that's the only place you can smoke it, then we don't want people now going to the parks or walking down the street or, frankly, be in front of children or people who don't want to be around it. So they have to find a place for people to do it so it's not out in the open. The one reference to New York law is so broad, you're allowed to smoke cannabis anywhere smoking is permitted. And I know many of us have not been in New York City in over 14 or 15 months, but if you're walking down the streets of Manhattan these days, cannabis is all over the place. Next slide, please. So what are employers' rights and responsibilities? I'm talking to the Chamber of Commerce. This is key and critical to some of the things you're going to be confronted with. So can an employer require an employee to undergo a drug test? The answer is yes, but with exceptions. When upon reasonable suspicion of employees' usage of cannabis while they're engaged in working for you, upon finding any observable signs of intoxication related to cannabis, following a work-related accident, random drug testing. Testing is part of a pre-employment screening or regular screening with current employees to determine use during an employee's prescribed work hours. So those are the limitations. But unless, if they test positive, but unless you can determine they were high or intoxicated or impaired during work, there's not a whole lot you can do about it right now. Next slide, please. The law is going to allow for a number of different licenses. So the first is the grow, the cultivator license. The one thing that we saw in the February legislation that references license specifically is that the law is going to permit currently up to 37 cultivation licenses for the first 2 years. And these licenses are going to be pretty valuable unless something happens on the federal level. And that's because in order to sell here, it has to be grown here because you can't transport it across state lines. So if the federal law changes, then there will be interstate commerce with all of this. But right now, everything that is sold in a medical dispensary is grown here in New Jersey, either outside or in a greenhouse or hydroponically in a building with no windows and no natural light. Class 2 license is the manufacturer license. Then there's a wholesaler license. There's a distributor license. There's a retail license, and there's a delivery license. What some of the people that I talk to nationally are telling me, home delivery is where this business is going to go. And that, so if you're thinking of a retail license, I would not want to get too much real estate space because there's not a lot of foot traffic coming in anyway. And B, you may want to get the delivery license because that's where a lot of sales will occur over time. Again, this business evolves over time. In Aspen, Colorado, in 2019, and Aspen's a ski town, touristy town, both winter and summer. But in 2019, the sale of cannabis exceeded the sale of alcohol. And believe me, there's no shortage of bars in the town of Aspen, and there's 7 cannabis retail establishments. This is going to change and evolve dramatically. So how many licenses are they going to give out for manufacturing, wholesale, distributor, retail, or delivery? We have no idea. They haven't said. We do know that when they were doing applications for medical, they were limiting it to so many licenses, north, central, and south. Will they do that here? We do not know. We don't know how many. Is it going to be geographically based? Part of the license applications, they're very interested in having these micro licenses, so it's not the big business coming in dominating this. They don't want, they want smaller stores, kind of what I would say mom and pop. They want to support that. They also want to support retailers that are retail establishments that are owned by women, minorities, and veterans. And there's going to be a thumb on the scale for those types of applications. They do know, and they usually go through a point process so that these applications, they check off the boxes, they award points, and in the law they have this tiebreaker provision as to where to go from there. But I think there's going to be a lot of ties, and there'll be, of course, litigation associated with the people who don't get the licenses. Next slide, please. So this is, so what should people do that if you're interested in getting in this business? Again, we don't have the license criteria, but this business is not necessarily for the faint of heart. Lots of people seem to think, oh, I'll open up a dispensary and I'll make a lot of money. Well, getting a license to open up a dispensary is going to be hard. And to what extent can you make money or not? In some respects, as more come online, there's going to be definitely a supply and demand in terms of the cost of what the retailer need to pay to get it, and then what's the markup to the ultimate customer. We know many people who have pizzerias or bagel shops, and yeah, you can make money selling bagels and you can make money selling slices of pizza, but you got to sell a lot of bagels and a lot of slices to make a lot of money. So we're not really sure what the profit margins will be based upon supply and demand. A key aspect is to try to get and establish a business plan based upon what people have seen in other states. Securing a location is going to be critical. We know some towns have said no, and we know some towns have said yes. Down the shore, I know Brick recently voted to not allow a dispensary in Brick. I was interviewed by News 12 afterwards to get my take on that. The one thing the reporter couldn't answer is, why did Brick say no? Why did the town say no? I think they say no for a couple of reasons. And I'm well aware, cannabis sales still has a stigma associated with it. Listen, it's been illegal for 70 years. Our kids and some of us have gone through school, been part of the DARE programs. Just say no. So to kind of change 180 degrees is really hard to do, and it's going to take time. But if your residents are going to go drive 2 miles and buy cannabis legally and put 2% of the tax in that town without any and bringing it back, what's the difference? If a downtown is suffering between COVID and retail, why not open a dispensary? What I've encouraged people to do who are on the no side, and even on the yes side, because they don't even know what they're talking about here, go to a dispensary, see what they look like. Some of these are really nice. You walk in, it's wood paneling. The people who work there are very knowledgeable. It's not incense burning and, day glow posters, as I said. These are regular businesses that are tasteful. They want to be good neighbors. They want to pay taxes, and they want to help the community. So before you say no, before you say yes, you should do a certain amount of due diligence. Hold on a second. I just got this month's magazine of the Marijuana Business Magazine, the compensation spectrum. If you go into Barnes and Noble in the magazine racks, you're going to see half a dozen now magazines promoting the cannabis industry. You can learn a lot from some of these magazines. Everybody who's going to work in a store is going to have a certain license, background checks. This is a very highly regulated industry, and the state's going to want everybody to take this very seriously. And if you own a dispensary, you're going to want that. There are already 2 trade associations in New Jersey around cannabis. Next slide, please. So there is going to be a window for towns to allow for the dispensaries in their communities. And they're basically going to have a 6-month window. And if they don't permit it, they're going to have to wait 5 years to apply or to allow them again. So between the 2% and this provision, communities are being encouraged to allow dispensaries to open up. Next slide, please. So as I said before, the recent statistic in New Jersey, we've got 107,000 people that have medical cards. The market's valued at $120 million. I think when we get a little more into it and mature and the dispensaries open up, it's going to be $1 billion industry in New Jersey. The medical market already supports 2,300 jobs. This is going to be expand. So again, my view is we shouldn't be doing this for the money. We should be doing this from a social justice standpoint and to eliminate the criminal activity. But there will be an economic benefit to this industry in New Jersey. I'm hoping we come online aggressively before Pennsylvania does. Again, New York, we missed the mark a little bit, but maybe we'll have an advantage from a tax standpoint. Next slide, please. Key to all of this also is to expunge records for people who have been through the criminal justice system. But there is some inconsistency in some of the law. So even though recreational cannabis is legal, it's not yet available to purchase, but people have it. And so the way the law is going is even if you're caught with it, there is significant decriminalization knowing you had to have bought it illegally at this point in time. But that will change, and that'll be part of the evolving legislation. Next slide, please. Now, there was a lot of controversy over the law with regard to minors. The law that was originally passed was that for the first offense for someone who was under 21, it was the police could not tell the minor's parents, which I think is nuts, especially if you have children under 18 and they're doing stupid things all the time. You want to know what the hell they're doing. So that was the first change. So now the parents are told. But it's, as you can see, it's, and this is what they wrestled with. Should it be like possession of alcohol? Should it be stronger? And they're trying to keep it low key. They don't want to ruin people's lives for having and smoking cannabis. Selling, etc., is a whole different can of worms. But this law will probably evolve also when it comes to these offenses, especially when it comes to minors and adults as well who violate the law. So I'm going to kind of wrap up now and allow for questions. The key is that this is going to be an evolving industry. The rules and laws are going to evolve. We don't even know what the rules are yet. Again, we hope to have a pretty good idea within the next 8 to 12 weeks. But this train is rolling, and it's going to happen. And I'm hoping that it'll be treated seriously in New Jersey. Clearly, will be in Trenton. And I would hope that communities and towns look at this with maybe a different perspective, to do their homework, do their research before they decide yes or no for what's best for their community. Again, thank you for having me today. Next slide, please, just to kind of close the loop a little bit. And I believe the slides are available for all of you. So here are the references and the citations. Also on I think the first, and my contact information is next slide. If anybody has any follow-up questions, it's jfanberg@brockeichler.com. We have a lot of information on our website along these lines to look at. And actually, it's the next slide that has my contact and phone number, and feel free to reach out. So Lori, Kate, and everybody, thank you for having me, and happy to answer as many questions as you may.
Well, thank you. This was all very informative and well presented to give everyone a clear picture of what is happening in New Jersey. I do see 2 questions that came across. I don't know if Kate has any additional, but one of the questions was, what towns in New Jersey are coming out for opening distributings and retails? Has there been towns that said that they're supporting this industry?
Yeah, I know you have, I know Asbury Park, Jersey City, Hoboken, Fort Lee. Those off the top of my head, we're actually, I've asked one of the assignments for my summer intern will be to track all the communities. I mean, there are literally hundreds and hundreds. Some have gone on record to say yes, some have gone on record to say no. Some are having meetings to discuss, to get input from their community. I spoke to the mayor of Livingston a couple of weeks ago, and Livingston doesn't have a downtown per se, but they do have some downtown areas. And the mayor said, well, we're going to bring it to the community and the town council. But when people have asked to open up vape shops or smoke shops, the town council has rejected those. I can't, in the light of that, I can't see how they would allow for a cannabis dispensary. So most towns are debating right now because of this 6-month window. They got to make a decision. So we're hoping we'll come up with a map who have said yes and no so far, but I don't have it done yet.
So the other question is if the town bans the sale, what does that mean for the people that are in that town? Is that where the delivery licenses come in, or that just means they just go to another town and purchase it?
Yes, they just can't go into their downtown area and go to a store, but they can go to the neighboring town to buy it. Interesting question. If you're in town A that doesn't allow dispensary, can town B that allows it permit a delivery to town A? And I don't think the Regulatory Commission has not addressed that yet. My guess is they can't prohibit that, but we'll have to see how the regs play out.
Okay. And the other question we have is, where can someone get an email to update them for when licenses are available to apply?
There is a website for the Cannabis Regulatory Commission at probably nj.gov, and that's where people can check. I think it's going to be pretty well reported when the commission comes out with their decisions on this. It'll be on the front page of every single newspaper, digitally or otherwise. So it'll be made pretty well public.
Okay. That's all we have as far as questions, but as you mentioned, your presentation will be available. We do have that. It was filled with a lot of information. We do have on the chat the cannabis link someone just put on, so thank you.
Thank you, Frank.
I just wanted to, again, thank you for your time. Everything that you said was just, we wanted to give everyone the most updated information available so they're educated on what they can tell their staff or what they can tell their clients or, their consumers. So we just wanted to give everyone an overview of what's happening in our state and how it could affect us in one way or another. So thank you for joining us again, John. We really do appreciate it.
My pleasure, and I'd be happy to come back once the Regulatory Commission finalizes its rules, and then we can go through it a little more specifically and when we have that information, but I'll leave that to you. But again, thanks so much for having me today, and be well and be safe.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And before we sign off, we just have a few chamber announcements. We have our May 26th Get Acquainted Party, which is a private event complimentary for our members, staff, and their families. That's taking place from 6 to 9 p.m. May 26th at Fantasy Island. It includes unlimited rides and arcade tokens. So you just have to contact the office with the amount of people coming from your business with a breakdown of how many children will be with you. Also, June 4th, we have a morning blend networking meeting with Greater Atlantic City Chamber of Commerce. So that's happening online, as well as June 9th, the Office of Homeland Security is coming back with our 5th annual partnership event, the reopening safely for the summer. So we have one large in-person event coming up and 2 that are online. And of course, we're here to help you any way that we can. So you could give us a call, message us, or come up to our building, even though there's some serious construction happening right now in front of it. But we are all here. So again, thank you so much. RSVP to Kate, and hopefully we will see you May 26th at Fantasy Island. So have a great morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks, you guys.
Thank you.